Nice. How many of you have an Android? Who actually purchased a Windows Phone 7? Okay. And who actually has a Windows Phone 7? Nice. That's just a little bit of market research. Who got in line to get an iPad 2? Only 3, 4 of us? That's it? You guys are sad. Oh. And how many of you actually have an iPad 2? What? Only you? I feel sorry for the rest of you guys. It is a magical device. All right, I promise not to brag about my iPad 2 too much. But the floating point performance is twice the speed of the iPad 1. And it has 2 CPUs, so 4 times faster. And 9 times faster graphics. And I'm also an Apple stockholder, so. Okay, so let's get started. The theme of today's presentation is greener pastures, and the idea comes a little bit from this idea that, well, it comes from the fact that we've been building Mono for about 10 years now, and which is a long time. And the early days were fairly rocky. First, because we didn't really have much of a .NET implementation. Second, because we worked mostly on Linux, and it was an operating system that we initially built it for the desktop, and Linux actually managed to succeed widely beyond the wildest expectations of anyone on the server, but on the client it's been more modest. And so Mono has shifted a little bit its objectives over the past few years from being entirely a Linux desktop technology to be a technology for servers, a technology for mobile devices, and other places where we saw that .NET would be an interesting technology to use. And kind of with the iPhone and superpower mobile devices, we found that there was a lot of interest in getting .NET on these things. And not only that, but with the wild success of these devices, there's an opportunity for you guys, probably a lot of your .NET developers, to actually get that knowledge and get it off. So this is the theme of the presentation. I want to give a couple of updates before we get started. We will have a conference for Mono, Mono-only conference from July 23rd to July 25th in Boston, Massachusetts this year. If you have something interesting to talk about, there's a call for papers, and we would like to hear from you, and we would love to have your presentation there. It's being hosted at the Microsoft New England Research and Development Center. Yes, that is the actual name. I did not make that up. And it's a beautiful facility. It's a really nice facility, and the Microsoft nerd guys tend to host pretty much anything. They host Ruby on Rails conferences, Django conferences. So it's not a Microsoft-centric event, and it's not even a Novell-centric event. It's being organized by the community, and we would like to have you there. I'm going to give you a couple of updates. They're going to be very quick, because the challenge that we have with Mono is that Mono is a very large project. We do have a lot of things that we build, and we just don't have all the time to discuss everything in detail. It would be great if you guys have a chance to go to MonoSpace. Otherwise, the papers will be published. But sadly, I'm not going to talk a lot about everything that we're doing. We picked a couple of topics, and we're going to stick to some of those topics. And maybe we'll do a little bit of a Q&A. We did roughly around the PDC 2008 is a time frame when we started to diverge a little bit from pure, from just being an open source .NET implementation. And what happened is that people started to find Mono useful in other platforms. So especially in the gaming space. So we created a thing called Mono SIMD that allow you to build SIMD hardware accelerated applications in C#. We demoed our C# compiler as a service. I'll talk a little bit about the status of that today. Back in the day, we showed the first Mono game powered on the iPhone. We had a very preliminary version of the first game on the iPhone. And today, there's roughly some 2,000 games on the App Store, on the Apple App Store, powered by Mono. About 10% of those make it to the top-selling list. So it's been very successful in that space. Mono went from being a technology for games to also be a technology for applications on the iPhone. So that was incredibly attractive. And I'll give you a little bit of an update on some of these pieces. Since then, although we kind of originally brushed off the iPhone because we were still inebriated with Linux, and we thought that was the only thing that mattered. Around the PDC time, we realized that actually this iPhone might actually be something big, and we might actually want to start to look into supporting the iPhone in some capacity. So we built a product called MonoTouch, and in the process of building MonoTouch, I sadly became an Apple fanboy. I don't know how it happened. It just crept in, and I have a Mac, and I have an Apple TV, and I have an Apple. I got my desktop and my. It is really sad to go from principal individual to fanboy, but that's what happened, and it all happened because we built MonoTouch. So we built MonoTouch like, oh, you know what? These Apple guys actually know a thing or two about API design. This is not bad. So we built that, and we improved upon their design. We made it accessible from C#, an awesome language. Then we were so enamored with the idea of what we did with MonoTouch that Jeff and myself, Jeff is somewhere here in the audience, right there, we built Mono for the Mac. And it's the same thing. It's the same idea, exposing all of the native APIs to the Mac. We just released Mono for Android. And again, when we started, we were like, we don't know if Android is going to be successful. The first month that it came out, it doesn't look kind of great. And then a year later, it was everywhere. Since the PDC 2008, we took our Mono-developed IDE, or development environment. We ported it to Mac and Windows. And it also became the standard IDE for the Unity game engine. Unity is a very popular engine for building games for iPhone, Android. It powers some of Nickelodeon's games, like the recent one, what is it called? Monkey. I just saw it on TV the other day. The Monkey Island, I think? Monkey Business? Anyways, the new Monkey game that you get ads on TV from Nickelodeon. I'm not supposed to say this, but The Sims 3 and The Sims 3, what is the other one? Sims 3 Medieval. Yeah, I was not supposed to say that. And I guess I'll be hearing from my lawyers. And we added Git support, which is very exciting. On the performance side, and again, I won't be able to go into the details, so you can check all of this on our website, or you can email me questions. We came up with a new garbage collector, so it's much closer to what .NET does. For many years, we used a conservative collector, not designed for high-performance computing. Now we have a much nicer garbage collector, scales to multiple CPUs. It is a precise collector and a generational one. We also replaced our, oh, look at that. There was a hint there that The Sims is there. All right. We also allow Mono to not only use its JIT engine. As you guys know, the .NET Framework and Mono provide a JIT engine that dynamically compiles IL code to native code. The problem is that JIT engines typically are designed so that they compile the code very fast, but they don't really produce very good code. They're designed for startup performance. And what we did is we also added the option to, instead of using our JIT compiler, which is very fast and generates poor code, to use the LLVM optimizing compiler. LLVM is a new compiler that powers Apple products. It's an open source effort. And the startup time is atrocious. So if you run a small program like Hello World, or a little program that will take 5 seconds to run, it will take another 5 seconds to compile. So it's a slow process, but it's great for high-performance computing. The quality of the code generated is superb. We plugged these into our MonoTouch product, and it reduced 30% the size of executables, which is very big, and it made the executables a lot faster. So this is a heavy-duty optimizing compiler engine. With an extra switch that we added to Mono, we eliminated the safety of C#. So you can basically run unsafe C#. And by running unsafe C#, you basically get pretty much the same performance of C++. I say pretty much the same because there's an area that we still need to optimize, which is inline functions. Once we get good heuristics for inline functions, there's no reason why we wouldn't match the same performance of a C++ compiler, of an optimizing C++ compiler. So we also did a couple of other interesting things. Of course, you can run IKVM to run your Java code, but we also worked in an open source tool called Sharpen that allows us to port Java code to .NET. As you guys know, Java has a very strong ecosystem, and sometimes they have many libraries that we would like to use in .NET that are just not available. So we use that to port our stuff. And we just released Moonlight 4 with hardware accelerated rendering on Linux. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. We couldn't, of course, do any of this without the help of the Microsoft people. Microsoft actually open sourced key components of .NET that we're able to reuse on Mono. So this eliminates the need for Mono to play catch up on some key aspects like MEF, the dynamic language runtime, F#, we didn't have to write it, we just used theirs, MVC 1 and 2, and MVC 3, NuGet, and Orchard CMS. All of these things run out of the box now on Mono. And in the case of Orchard CMS, you can also get instructions on how to set it up directly from Microsoft. And of course, my team has been, my team is a fantastic team. They do great work. And some of these three guys right there in that cluster, Larry, Chris, Jeff, and David must be somewhere around here, right there, and Gonzalo, have been working around the clock to show you something at the end of the session. And of course, it depends on the open source .NET community. So, our vision is basically that we believe that we love .NET more than Microsoft does. It's like when your girlfriend is in denial about her friends. It is a little bit like that. Microsoft is in denial that the Mac OS exists, and the iPad exists, and the iPhone exists, and Android exists, and Chrome OS exists, and all of those things. So we want to help Microsoft, bring the .NET love to other platforms. That's what we do. And we believe that in the future, you really are going to refer to .NET and C# as the ECMA virtual machine and C# as public standards that are available everywhere. They're not going to be Microsoft-only technologies. Today, they still have a very strong stigma. Outside of the Microsoft world, these technologies have a very strong stigma that these are Microsoft technologies and closed technologies. So we want to change that. So one of the things that we talked about at the last PDC was our compiler as a service. And it didn't really get a lot of airtime, partially because Anders did announce his compiler as a service, which is not released yet, but they're working on it. But we did have ours. And some of you tested our compiler as a service and found a bunch of problems with it, a bunch of problems with our design, and we fixed many of those. The most important thing is that our compiler as a service was limited to Linux. So you could only run it with Mono, or actually to Mono. It didn't really run on .NET. So we ported our compiler as a service to Microsoft Windows, and we made sure that you could use our compiler as a service in your applications. We do provide a Visual Studio solution, and it even runs on Silverlight. I don't know if I can do a demo because I need to get the, I think I need to get this window. I think I need to get the, so let me see if I can get this. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So now I can see what I'm doing. Okay. So somebody took our compiler as a service and built a quick UI. This is not, okay, this is a little bit difficult. So this is not a great UI, so just bear with me for a second. But basically what our compiler as a service allows you to do is we give you an API called evaluate, and you can feed it any C# string. It will compile that string, and it will run that string, right? And it will execute the code. You can use this to script your own applications. You can use this, for example, we use it for MonoDevelop IDE to provide some of the parsing and IntelliSense. So for example, this one, like I said, the UI is not fantastic, but it shows. I think it shows a point that you can, you edit this little box, and then you will evaluate it. You can define classes. I can run my class, or you can run from x in new int 1, 2, 3, where x is bigger than 2, and 2, select x. Oh, I need to use it in system link. Anyways, I didn't import that namespace, but you get the idea. Now let me. I'm gonna need. Okay. Sorry. And then, oh, that's not what I wanted. Hold on, guys. It's all okay. It's all good. All right. Oh, that's too big. All right, doesn't matter. This is probably better for me to type because the Silverlight UI is not very good at this, but you can do public void class X, public dynamic add, dynamic A, dynamic B, return A plus B. Okay, I hope I can get this right. Damn it, okay. I'm going to postpone this demo. Oh, I know what it is. Oh, no, never mind. I'm using the old mono there. Okay. So, that is horrible. Horrible. Okay. Let me just enter this again. This again. Okay. Woo. Demo failure. Okay. So I can do this, and now I can say what? Oh. Okay, K equals new X. All right. Whew. So I can add foo and bar, or I can add 1 and 2. And of course, the one thing that I couldn't do before, because Silverlight doesn't have I/O, I can do from X in, well, I can do directory, get files. You know, I showed this at PDC last year, or 2 years ago. What? Oh, using. Did I not do that? Is it directory info? Huh. All right. Okay. Moving on. You didn't see that. I don't know what happened there. Now, the one thing that I wanted to show you about that is kind of interesting is actually this one. So let me go back here. So one of the members in our community, and I guess I'm going to need another window. Okay, I obviously didn't test this stuff, but one of the members in our community took our compiler as a service and modified ASP.NET. And modified ASP.NET a little bit, MVC, to do a couple of interesting things. So let me open a Safari window. Okay. So I'm just going to connect. This is a very simple host 8080. No, local host 8080. So this is where our ASP.NET server is listening on. What? Oh, never mind. Still running the old mono. This is a new one. Okay. So as you can see, like in any other ASP.NET application, the first time you hit the page, ASP.NET is compiling the app, and it takes a little bit. Did you see that? It takes a little bit to render the page. So what I'm going to show you is this modified version of. Now I had my demo set up with everything on this screen, but it's kind of a pain to move everything over there. So I'm just going to do it in this one. So this is a source code for this app, right? It says ASP.NET MVC. Now I'm going to modify this thing here. So it says hello mix. And I'm going to save it. And I'm going to go back to my Safari window. I'm just going to refresh. So I want you to pay attention to the speed as soon as I hit Command R. Are you ready? Did you notice that? I think it was too fast. OK, let me go back. Hello, Mix. Please take a note of the speed in which we rebuild ASP.NET pages. All right, ready? Alt R. Oh, you guys don't seem impressed at all for ASP.NET people. Thank you. I had to force that out of you. All right. So that is our compiler as a service. The one thing that I wanted to talk about today is Manos de Mono, which is it's a new approach at building web applications that that our friend Jackson Harper, who is right there. You should stand up, Jackson. He's kind of a star in the independent .NET world, in the indie world, and so this is really his project. But I'm going to talk about it. One of the ideas behind Manos de Mono is to change a little bit the way that you build application. And it's inspired by some of the new developments on the web universe, in particular the Node.js server. And the idea is to build applications that are event-based, as opposed to the way that we build them today. Today, when a request comes into the server, you get the user credentials, you make a database query, you construct the page, and you output the page to the client, and you return, right? And the problem that this approach has is that during the entire time that the operation is taking place, you have the connection open to the server. You might be your process might actually just be waiting on the database to respond, right? Or you might be waiting for the file system to respond. And in the meantime, you hold the thread. You're not returning the thread back. The thread cannot do anything else. You might have another 200 requests coming into the server, but there's nothing really you can do. I mean, there's 200 people that you could be processing, but instead your system is spinning. The most common fix for this is you have multiple threads to dispatch this, so you can have 100 threads or 200 threads, right? So you basically associate one thread per incoming request. So if you have 200 requests, you have 200 threads, and you basically are wasting all of this memory space, all of this stack space, handling these threads, because they're mostly all blocking. So they're actually not doing much work. So one of the observations that the Node.js people said was that the most efficient use of your machine was basically have one thread per CPU. Because the reality is that a CPU can only be doing one thing at a time. So what if you could design APIs that worked along those lines? Now, the kind of a little bit of the problem that people have with this is, we're used to have powerful machines, and we keep thinking, well, fetching data from the disk is really not that slow, right? Because we don't really remember these things. Or accessing the database, well, that takes a fraction of a second. How bad can that be? So the Node people actually put out this nice chart together to give you an idea of how slow things are. Accessing an array takes about 250 cycles. An element in an array takes about 250 cycles on your computer. And if you compare that to the time that it takes to access your disk or the network, you'll see that very quickly that you're basically tying up your threads for very little work that they're doing. So the idea with Manos and the idea with Node is that the way that you build your application is you build it around this notion of events. So you have events so you say, I want to read this file. When you're done, when the file is ready, let me know on this callback. So when you have a block from the disk, let me know on this callback. In the meantime, go back and handle the next request, right? Or notify me in 10 seconds about this event. Or do this Google, go fetch this URL, do this REST request, and when that REST request is in the machine, let me know so I can process it. So for example, you could implement something like that if you needed to. So a common scenario would be, for example, this would probably kill a machine very quickly. And the idea is if you need to keep a connection open continuously, for example, for a chat server, right? If you want to keep the connection open, then you basically tie up a whole thread in the system. Now, there's other approaches, like you can poll the server, so you continuously poll, which is not efficient in the client or the server. Or you can have some sort of comment system where you get some callbacks sometimes. None of those are efficient. And this is where kind of WebSockets come into play. The idea of WebSockets is that you can have a dedicated connection to the server, and the client will wake up when data is available, and the server will wake up when the client pushes data. This has been on every Unix and Windows kernel for years. And the web really hasn't been able to take advantage of this until the arrival of WebSockets. Despite all the comments from Deans on Tuesday's keynote, WebSockets are an important piece of technology. So if you were to build a system that would provide, for example, live trade data or a chat client or any other kind of live activity, you would have something like this. And what happens here is basically that, you know, ASP.NET will enter the process request. The first thing that you would need to tell ASP.NET is, do not kill me. That's what the script timeout does. Because otherwise, ASP.NET will kill your process after 2 minutes of processing time. I don't know if you guys knew that. And then you basically run your loop, and you basically generate the data. In this case, we're just generating random numbers, and we're sending the data back to the client. Where you used to use this with an existing IIS or ASP.NET setup, you basically would be consuming a lot of threads. Now, Microsoft has a solution to this problem. Well, we'll get to the Microsoft solution in a second. This is the way that you would build, for example, with Manos, a system. When you make a web request, you say, as soon as you get the response, you let me know, right? So it's very similar to begin and end callbacks. These are a couple of systems that, so these are a couple of scenarios where you would use this. And obviously, this would not be web scale, as you all know, with ASP.NET. So I already explained this thing. So Microsoft does have a solution to this problem. And the solution is to add another 20 Azure instances to your problem. We saw a demo on Tuesday where you could scale your Azure instances, but these come expensive. These are expensive devices. So the way that we do this is you actually need to rethink the way that you do your server. And this is how you would work with Manos. This is equivalent to the process request from ASHX. The first thing that we do is we're going to turn that into a WebSocket. So you call the WebSocket.upgrade method. And then same thing, random number generator. And the interesting piece here is that we're using one of Manos APIs to add a timeout. Right? In this case, we're not going to be generating data all the time. So we say, notify us every half a second. And this is the method that you're going to invoke. And all the method does is generate a random number, send a random number back to the client. And if the client, and we hook up this thing, so it says, if the client ever closes the connection, just stop, right? So if the client dies or goes away, we'll do that. So I'm going to show you the Manos doing that. If I can get to, if I can get this here, all right. So I'm just going to show you the source code for this. This is a very simple program that will graph on the client. It will just create a WebSocket. It will connect to the server, and it will start fetching events. And this is the same source code that I just showed you a second ago. It's the exact same thing. The only thing that we do is that we prepare it so that the first time that you get a hit, we'll send the index.html. And the index.html file, all it does is, you know, it uses the smoothie chart. And starts receiving events, paints them on a canvas, and fetches them from this URL, which is going to be localhost 8080 process count. So let me run this guy, and let me go back to my browser. And again, it's port 8080. So this is the graph system. And as you can see, that's generating the data. What is interesting here is that you're not using a thread for each one of these. So you could have 10,000 clients connected to this. In fact, it's going to be really limited by the kind of power that your machine has. But it's no longer bound to the number of threads that you spin up per application. In fact, unless you explicitly use threads, you will only be using one thread per CPU. So if you have 8 CPUs, you'll get 8 threads. If you have 1 CPU, you'll get 1 CPU. You'll get 1. And just to keep it in mind, I mean, just so you get an idea of this, when you build GUI applications, you tend to build GUI applications with one thread. You don't create one thread per control. You don't create one thread for the OK button. You don't create one from the cancel button. You don't create one from the data grid. You know, you can create some for some background activities, but you don't create one per control, right? And this is similar in that spirit, that you only create one thread for the whole application, and you use events to dispatch and send data. So for certain kind of applications, Manos is a very useful technology. It's not a replacement for ASP.NET MVC. For some things, you need to use MVC. For some things, you can use web forms. But for some other applications, you can use Manos. So now let's talk a little bit about greener pastures. So I assume that most of you here are Windows developers, and you've lived in a nice ecosystem, and you're probably the customer that Steve Ballmer has in mind when he talks about 3 screens. When Steve talks about 3 screens, he talks about Xbox in the living room, about the Windows Phone, and about the PC. But many of us, I don't know, maybe we belong to the fringe parts of society. We actually, our screen is a Windows Phone. We maybe have an iPad, an Apple TV. We might have a PS3, an Xbox. We have in-cart entertainment. We use a GPS, assorted tablets from assorted vendors, and other devices. And we believe that there's greener pastures out there, and that's what this beautiful graph exemplifies. We Googled for that for a long time until we found the proper balance of cows and penguins. Now, this slide used to be very busy. We had a lot of computers in there. But in particular, I think that one of the most interesting ones is the money-making machine, or not necessarily, as some of us app developers that have made no money can testify. But there's a lot of you can bring a lot of the knowledge that you have on Link, on system data, on system XML, C#, delegates, anonymous data methods, and so on, to other platforms. And I, in particular, very excited about MonoTouch. We have basically the base .NET class library. So everything that has nothing to do with the GUI. So System, XML, MS Corelate, parallel frameworks, which automatically started working the day that the iPad 2 shipped with 2 CPUs. Before that, it was cute to have, but it didn't really buy you much. Now it automatically scales. Do you have your demo, Jeff? The ray tracer, by any chance? On your iPad? No? All right. Okay, never mind. So you certainly have that, but we also, one of the things that we did is we chose not to bring Windows Forms. We have a Windows Forms implementation. So we figured there's nothing more hideous than running Windows Forms on an iPhone. That would be a slap in the face of Chairman Steve. And so instead we took a different route, and what we did is, just like Windows Forms is a wrapper around Win32, we built MonoTouch, which is a wrapper around Cocoa Touch. So we built every single API that you can use on the iPhone is available in MonoTouch. So we have native APIs that export C# filling. So instead of using the Objective-C, this is going to be very confusing. Instead of using the Objective-C patterns, you use the C# delegates, you use C# events, you use C# properties, you use C# strings. So we kind of C#ify the API in the process, and it feels very much like when you're programming a regular .NET application, except you happen to be using a different stack. So instead of using system drawing, you'll be using core graphics. Instead of using the animation frameworks from WPF or Silverlight, you'll be using core animation, right? So you basically are programming to the native APIs. And the advantage of that is that you end up with applications that look very native. So we have a couple of screenshots of some of those. This is a game. Actually, this game is built with XNA. We'll talk about that in a second. But it runs on the iPhone. That is just a magazine app that was built by one of our community members. There's Sudoku games, puzzle games. That app is also built with XNA. We'll talk about that in a second. One of the most interesting ones, in my opinion, is the oscilloscope. This is an oscilloscope for the iPad. It is an actual oscilloscope. It's not a toy. You can actually hook music up to this thing, and you can do your signal analysis. And if you know a little bit of electronics, or you're an Arduino guy, you can actually use this as a real oscilloscope. The other one that I really like is from my friend Frank. It's called iCircuit. It is so nice that actually Apple has this on every Apple store. So if you go to an Apple store and play with an iPad, they'll have the iCircuit application. It is a circuit simulator where you can basically use diodes and all kinds of other things and put together your own circuits. Great for learning. the samples that ship with the application, this is very interesting. The samples that ship with the application that include a flip-flop and basic electronic components were designed by a guy called MIX11, who is the head engineering director for Insomniac Games. So he's one of the most famous game developers, and he contributed all the electronics for this application. Now, I would like to take a second and plug my own iPhone application. It's a free app, so I'm not going to make a lot of money on this, unless I go and change the price for the duration of this talk. But what happened is that as a humanist, and I hope that you guys are like that, I like to research human behavior, right? So every time there's an interesting link on Reddit about human behavior, I go and read it. And last year I was reading about the effects that music has on people, and I'm also, anyways. And this was a very interesting study that was conducted at some university. And the study basically, they called students that were going to do some interview. They were going to interview them about something, and the interviewer would ask the subject questions, right? So in one case, it would just be playing, regular radio, heavy metal, rock, whatever was on the radio. And they would ask the questions, and they would do the study. The people that came into the study didn't know what the study was about. And they asked them some question about some random subject. And at the end of the study, the guy conducting the study said to the subject, "Hey, would you like to go out? Maybe grab a drink or something." And in the control group that had just plain music, only 20% of the subjects gave their number out, right? And then they had another group where they play romantic music during the interview. And in that case, 50% of the subjects gave their phone number. So I figured, music plays an important role in human relations. And I figured there's too much violence on Twitter, and I'm insulting way too many people on Twitter for being assholes. So I built my Twitter application. And I added two very important features, in my opinion, that help elevate the discourse based on this sound research from the university. Now, this application is built entirely in monotouch. Oh, this looks terrible. You can't really see this. Can we focus this thing? I guess not. All right. Well, let me show you a couple of things. The first thing is that when you're in the middle of a discussion and you need to tell some person the truth about their belief system, you're furiously refreshing because you just told them that they're fucking idiots. And and I need to get the volume up. So you're typically, you're on your mentions tab and you're telling people to. And we need a microphone here. Oh, here we go. So every time that you refresh, my technology brings in some chickens. Now, you might be thinking, well, Miguel, that is ridiculous. And also, I want you to notice that the chicken is a two-stage chicken. And when I release, right? So I figured. Now, there's another side effect to this, but the chicken basically tells you you're taking yourself too seriously, right? You shouldn't really be insulting your fellow colleagues on Twitter, and you're not doing anybody any favors. So I added my chicken. Now, there is a last line of defense. At some point, you might be thinking, you know what? This guy really is an imbecile. I don't care what the chicken says. This guy is really an idiot. So you started to compose, hey, you, and hey, you, idiot. So I got this music. And I hope you can hear it. And after doing extensive research among my colleagues, we found that this music, this music has two properties. The first one is after doing a lot of research with my colleagues, this music actually calmed them down and reminded them of the importance of being humans and allowing other people to make mistakes and be graceful. Also, it was the only free music I could find. As it turns out, licensing music for these kind of things is really expensive. Now, let me tell you about the chicken industry. What happened with the chicken noises that you just heard is that I actually tried to license professional chicken sounds. Now, you would think that, on the internet, yes, you can find a chicken. Well, it turns out there's a whole industry of chickens. So I probably spent about some 6 hours listening to different versions of clockings on chickens, and I narrowed down to about 20 different samples of chickens. Now, the problem that I ran into is that since my Twitter client is actually an open source client, I wanted my Twitter client to be basically a sample that people could use to figure out how to build monotouch applications and how to do the UI, how to do the networking, how to do events, delegates. I think it's a great app because it really uses a lot of features from the iPhone. And it's a clone of the main Twitter app. So it's a clone pretty much piece by piece. I just replaced the things I didn't like with the things that I liked. But it's pretty much everything you could expect from a Twitter client, a full Twitter client. So, so since I wanted to open source this, the terms for licensing the chicken noises were outrageous. I mean, we're talking $3,000 for 150,000 plays. And then, if I wanted to do unlimited, because it's open source, I couldn't really regulate the use of the chicken. So I ended up recording myself on GarageBand. So what you heard there is my chicken impression. I basically decided to give up on the whole professional chicken noise. And I guess I was just surprised that there's such a vibrant community of animal sound industry. It is really amazing. And the terms, you have to look at some of the terms. I mean, that was the other problem. I couldn't really afford a lawyer to go through the legal technicalities of what I could do with the chicken noises. So anyways, that's what I wanted to say about my tweet station. My poor friend Joseph has heard this story about a dozen times, and he's sick of it. And I said, Joseph, you just need to hang on one more time. This is going to be the final one where I explain the vision of TweetStation. And I hope you all guys go to the App Store and get it. I just added Instapaper support, so you should all be getting it now. It's free. All right. Now, last week, we're very excited because we just released this thing. Last week, we released Mono for Android. Just like MonoTouch, it has everything that you get from MonoTouch from a .NET perspective, but it has two extra nice features. The first one is you don't need a Mac to develop apps for Mono on Android. You can use Visual Studio. So we actually worked very hard on getting a Visual Studio integration. And as it turns out, it's pretty popular. It's almost more popular than our Mac product. The second thing is that you get full JIT support. One of the things that Apple locks down on their device is JIT support. So Mono is unable to do JIT compilation on the iPhone. You can only batch compile. You can only pre-compile. You can't do type.getType. You can't use reflection emit. You can't use dynamic in C#4. All of those things are disabled because the device won't let you do that. So on Android, we don't have any of those limitations. So we actually have a very, it's basically the same powerful VM that you get on the desktop, except it's running on an Android device. And just like we did for the iPhone, we built a binding to every single API on the Android. So again, we chose not to expose Windows Forms. We chose to give you native API access so you can build applications like TweetStation. Now, somebody should build TweetStation for Android. I don't have an Android device personally. And TweetStation was a bit of a personal thing because I really wanted to elevate the discourse, if you can believe me. And so somebody with an Android device could port my code over to Android. Now, so as you can see, there's a little bit of a theme here with building native applications. And you could say that some of that was caused by when Steve Jobs, I mean the good Steve, when Steve Jobs said, what? Okay, the gooder, Steve. The bester, Steve. The what? Oh, I'm not going to repeat that. That is so horrible. As a fan of the news of the good Steve, I can't let that stand. So anyways, so in part it was his message that he didn't want ugly applications on his device. And we were thinking, you know, he's right. We don't want ugly applications anywhere. So there's been we've been really thinking about, you really want to use native APIs as much as you can. So we didn't want to put Windows Forms. We didn't really want to put, we didn't really want to put WPF or anything like that, or a cross-platform thing like Flash on these devices. So that's been a little bit of a theme. And we think that there's a lot of potential here because it used to be, some 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 6 years ago, the world was dominated by Windows. So anything Microsoft said, that's really what went. And what has happened is that now we live in this beautiful, heterogeneous world. Now, some people might not like this, but on the other hand, it's really good for mono. So, but what is really interesting is all of this, there's so many presentation stacks to choose from. So you can go with Windows and WPF. And a lot of you in the past few years, when we say, hey, why don't you port your app to Linux? And I go, nah, WPF is all that matters. We're never going to port anywhere else. There's no other system. But now with the success of the iPhone, the iPad, the Macs, Android, the success of HTML itself, people are starting to think again, well, maybe we need to do something to support the code on multiple platforms. So kind of our message is, you really should be building your application in such a way that you can have multiple UIs. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So the idea is, you need to split your code in two basically. If you're building a Windows app, split your code in two. Put your business logic, your libraries, your helper routines in a GUI-less compartment and build the presentation on top of this. So you can still do a great UI with WPF or Silverlight, whatever you want, but keep them isolated. Because if you keep them isolated, then you can swap them out. So the idea is that once you have that, you might start with the first application. You might start with a WPF UI, but then you have an option to go to the iPhone. You can have an option to go to Android. You can have an option to go with our Monomac stack. You can go with GTK, Sharp, and Unix, or you can even have a web UI now that mobile applications are all the rage. So even if you don't want to do native apps with Monotouch, it would still help you to have your business logic isolated so you can build a mobile site and a website. We've done this ourselves. We follow our own advice. This is a mono documentation website. And it's the documentation engine is completely independent from the UI. This is rendering on the amazing Chrome. This is the native client for Linux. So it's the same exact engine, but this one is running on Linux. And you can see a native tree and index and search and other features that are easy to do on the desktop. And this is our Mac version of the exact same application. So this is the native Monomac app. This same principle, I don't know if you guys had a chance to download the MIX application. It's in all of the app stores. There's a MIX app for the iPhone, a MIX app for Windows Phone 7, and a MIX app for Android. They're all built from the same code base, the same engine, the same downloading system, the same everything else. And Craig Dunn just built different UIs, one for each platform. It's a shame. It used to be an open source app, and it's a shame that it doesn't exist anymore. Now, it is, we don't really have the Microsoft kind of budget to make nice presentations or marketing presentations, which is a little bit of a problem when we're trying to pitch this vision. But luckily, iPad, business, apps, is it that? But luckily, Apple did this for us. Well, not for us. They didn't know they were doing it for us. So where's this? Profiles? OK. So I want to show you a little video of a company that built, that did this across multiple platforms. The application that these guys talk about. Oh, maybe we should. Can we get volume on this thing? I'll let you watch it.
Medtronic is the leading medical technology company in the world. Our products alleviate pain and restore health for those with chronic disease. The lifeblood of Medtronic is producing new products. Without innovation, we wouldn't be able to get those products and therapies to our patients. iPad fuels innovation so we can get information to customers much quicker than we could before.
We have thousands of users of iPads across the globe at Medtronic. We have developed over 15 iPad applications for productivity, for efficiency, and for knowledge sharing.
The iPad helps us tell a very impactful story to clinicians and patients around the world. We created ITV Therapy to help organize information by various audiences and also by topics. With the iPad, not only can the sales representative pull up information very quickly, but they can use graphics to help tell a story in a way that's very memorable.
The MStar application allows us to integrate into back-end systems for sales ordering and product registration purposes.
If I look across all business units, we did see a different sort of excitement when the iPad first came out. The information is delivered in such a way it encourages people to use the applications.
The Medtronic internal application store is a critical tool for managing these applications. We're able to quickly.
All right, I think that's enough. We'll stop this because the video is paused, and you're probably bored by now. So what is interesting, so the one thing that Apple didn't say, so the one thing that the video does not say, if you watch it entirely, is that the app, is that the MStar app that they show there, it's built on the iPad, it's built with MonoTouch. But the same app is actually also available for Android. They run internally also on WP7 devices. They have an HTML UI, and they have a native desktop. So basically, these guys offer a full spectrum solution to their customers. This application has over 500 screens, and they had a team of about 20 people working on this for over a year, or 6 months or a year, I can't remember. The link for the reference is there, and the slides will be available for anyone that wants to check them later. But this is, this is one of the guys that, we work with these guys to make sure that they design their application in this way. They are coming up with a book called iPad for Enterprise Development in the next couple of months, and I suggest you get them. So when it comes to cross-platform, again, we don't want to dictate your lowest common denominator. We want to give you access to all of the native APIs. But, sometimes there are good cases for going, for having an intermediate representation. And Chris, who is right there, so Chris in particular built an interesting, he started an effort called Mono Mobile. It's an open source effort, and the idea is to abstract some of the functionality that applications need for things like GPS or the gyroscope and things like that. And the idea is that, at least for some of these cases, instead of building the same code over and over again, once for Android, one for iOS, and one for WP7, that you at least get a subset that you can use across the board. So it's an open source effort, and some people are starting to contribute to it, and it makes sense if you want to join that effort or you want to consume that effort. The other thing that is kind of interesting is the monogame project. And monogame is an XNA implementation. Only with the 2D APIs. It still doesn't have 3D. The next release will have 3D. But what is interesting is that this platform runs, although it started initially only on the iPhone, it's been ported to the Android. It now works on Monomac and will also run on Linux. So you can use the same code base when it comes to gaming across all platforms. So in particular, one of our customers sent me this screenshot of his game. It was just approved on the Windows Phone 7 device. These are actual screenshots from the device. As you can see, it's the same thing all over the place. This one is already in the Windows Phone 7 store, so you can get it. The other two are still in the process of being submitted. And as you can see, there's an iPhone there, an Android there, and the last one is our Mac or Monomac stack. These are some other screenshots of our application. And in particular, I wanted to show you something that my friend James just gave me, but it's going to be a little bit painful with these two windows. But you probably guys have used the Farseer Physics. This is running natively on, I don't know how to use this. But this is Farseer Physics running on Monomac. OK, so the ball went off. Very exciting demo. Thank you. Should I show you something else? I'm wondering. All right, doesn't matter. We don't have a lot of time, and we might not even have time for Q&A. So we want to show you just one last thing, which is what my Moonlight team has been working on very hard in the last couple of days, which is Moonlight on Android. So we're bringing. I hope you can see this. Actually, can we get this higher up? How does this work? All right, this is going to be a little bit of a problem. But this is a Motorola Zoom tablet. And, whoa, what did I do here? Oh, there we go. So, so this is one of the samples of, this is one of the Silverlight samples that you've probably seen. So I'll show you a couple of things here. But the first thing that you need to know is that this port was just finished last night. That's why these three guys didn't make it to the party until very late. That's why they didn't really get drunk, and that's why they look so tired. So, you know, these four guys. So this is Moonlight running on the Android device. And I can, oops, no, rub balloons. So still not this software is still not hardware accelerated, but at least you can see your familiar first-year physics application in action, the same one that I showed you a second ago. This is showing the hardware accelerated support that we added to Moonlight. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this demo from Silverlight. Are you guys familiar with this? This is one of the Silverlight demos where they show how they could scale this on the GPU. So all the scaling for this little guy is happening on the GPU. Probably that, you know. Let me show you something a little bit more interesting, which is this is it a 480p video? It's a 480p video. Playing on Moonlight on the Android, and you can control the perspective and the 3D transform with my finger, or I can reset it. So that's using the entire pipeline, the entire video pipeline. We wanted to show you today also smooth streaming. Smooth streaming is running, except the decoder that we have. On this particular, there's a bug on the decoder that we have right now for this particular device. We couldn't get the fix on time unless you guys got it in the last 10 minutes. No? All right. But we do have smooth streaming running, so you can actually smooth stream to this device. Now, of course, there's a bunch of caveats about Moonlight running on the Android tablet. So, you know, I don't want to get your hopes high, but, you know, so we want to be clear. This is still not a product. It's something that we're working on. We don't know when it's going to be ready. We believe that there's a lot of compelling scenarios for using, you certainly want to do some native experiences on the Android, but for some things like animations and things that you have historically done with Flash or Silverlight, I think that this is a good fit. This will integrate natively with the Android UI. So, you know, for those cases, we think it makes sense. There's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. This will only be supported on tablets. It will not be supported on phones. So it's not really a solution for phones. It's really only for tablets. It's not going to be available on the iPad. And the reason is Silverlight requires the JIT engine to be available. And as I said, we don't have a JIT engine. You cannot do JITting on the iPad. So we won't be getting Moonlight on the iPad. It's an Android tablet-only technology. And as usual, we don't have DRM or Netflix available on it. And we have 1 minute and 42 seconds for questions. And you need to go to the microphone. Not everybody at the same time? I'm sorry? One question.
Are you going to build a XAML-like designer for MonoTouch and MonoDroid so we can use the same type of notation even though we're using different objects?
We do not have plans right now, although one of our employees on his copious spare time has built a XAML loader that will create Android UIs out of XAML. Now, it is XAML, not the Silverlight XAML markup. So you will use Android markup with Android things, so you cannot really share the XAML between those two. It is really an early prototype. As for the GUI designer, at this point, we don't have anything to announce.
Hi, I apologize if you already answered this question before at the start of your talk. Are you confident that you're by all the issues with Apple and their regulations for,
yes.
Okay, with touch?
Yes. It's in the terms. What happened is between April and September of last year, Apple changed the terms and they said we will not allow third-party frameworks. Apple has reversed that decision in September. And the reason for that are all over the press, so I don't want to get into that.
Okay.
But if you Google up DOJ, you'll probably figure it out.
Great, thank you.
Is Silverlight available for all the other platforms? I noticed it said bring Silverlight to Android. Is it, through Mono, is Silverlight available on the other platforms?
It's available. Moonlight is available on Android and Linux. Running X Windows. So it's only those two platforms right now. Okay. You can get Silverlight for Windows Phone 7 from Microsoft, for Mac, and Windows. Okay. And we're considering porting our Moonlight implementation to the Mac, so you could put Silverlight apps on the App Store. Because right now you can't put Silverlight apps on the Mac App Store because it's an external dependency. So we're considering that.
Okay.
Is there any library or way to easily consume OData sources?
Yes. In fact, Microsoft, I forgot to add that to the slide. Microsoft open sourced the client libraries, system data, whatever it's called, whatever. And you can consume, you can build OData clients. It's very easy to do, and we have the libraries. What we do not have is the server stuff. So we can host OData servers, but we can consume OData information. Yes?
Hey, Miguel. Can you bridge the Monos toolkit with ASP.NET? Because the WebSocket stuff is very intriguing, and I'd like to be able to take that into my existing MVC project.
You can run the two servers on the same machine at the same time. So you can run Manos and ASP.NET on the same machine. I don't think we have plans of running in the same process, but the reality is that you probably in those cases you will be having your information stored on Redis or a SQL database. So I don't think it really matters. The data will be, you'll be sharing the data using some external source. So I think that you do the sharing that way. And there's a great, the Stack Overflow guys took my Redis client implementation and made it fully asynchronous, callback driven, and scalable. So you could use the Stack Overflow Redis client for that on both ASP.NET and on Manos. And if you guys want to ask more questions about Manos, Jackson is here. More about Mono Mobile, Chris is there. The Moonlight team is over there. If you want to give us tons of cash, Joseph Hill is there. And I forgot to mention I have another project called Monomac WinForms. So if you have a WinForms application and you're willing to make some changes, this is not one-to-one mapping, but if you have a WinForms app and you want to bring it to the Mac and make some changes, you can talk to James Clancy about his Monomac WinForms project, which is, raise your hand, that's Clancy, all right? And here in the front?
Yeah, another question. Is there any way to hook up MonoDevelop with TFS and maybe also automatic builds?
We don't offer anything out of the box. I know that there's a TFS client that somebody wrote a few years ago that could be used to build a backend. We have built Subversion and Git backends, and we also have an old Git text backend. So you could use those to build a TFS implementation if you wanted to. The reality is that in the open source world, we don't really see TFS. It's at this point, it's dominated by Git. So, so it would really be something that somebody else would have to build. Yes?
Have you guys published a translation guide between the controls in MonoTouch, MonoDroid, and Silverlight Phone? Like,
no, we haven't. The concepts are, even the concepts are different, and the layering and the rules and what you can add or remove are actually different. But Craig Dunn, on his blog post, the guy that did the Mix app, he built a little Rosetta Stone of concepts. So he says when you have a dialog view controller, or a view controller on the iPhone, you actually use an activity on the Android and use whatever it's called in WP7. So you can start there. It's definitely something interesting for people building cross-platform apps, but I don't think it is being created yet. And I think they're kicking me out, right? All right. Thank you for coming.